The woman in the fur-trimmed coat doesn't hesitate. She looks at the man standing near the entrance of the Rideau Center, takes in his worn boots, his second-hand jacket, the quiet way he holds himself, and makes a decision in under 2 seconds. This isn't a warming shelter. Her voice is loud enough to carry. There's a place on Bronson Avenue for people like you. I'd suggest you use it. The man doesn't move. He doesn't flinch. He just looks at her, calm, steady, the way someone looks at a thing they've been expecting to see for a long time. I'm sorry, he says. I was waiting for someone. You're blocking the entrance. He steps aside. One small step, enough to make room, not enough to disappear. She leans closer. The scent of her perfume is expensive and aggressive. I know what you're doing. Her voice drops to something almost intimate, the way contempt sometimes is. Don't make me call security, I will. Vivienne. The man beside her shifts uncomfortably. Her husband, or close to it. Let's just go in. No. She doesn't look away from the man in the jacket. Some people need to understand they don't belong everywhere. The man holds her gaze for one more moment. Something moves behind his eyes, not anger. Something older than anger. Then he nods slowly and steps further aside. She walks past him, heels clicking on the wet pavement, not looking back. 3 weeks later, she will look up from the head table at her daughter's wedding reception and see that face across the room. The same face. And her knees will go soft in a way she won't understand until it's far too late. Ottawa, Ontario, late October. The kind of cold that arrives early in the capital, before people are ready, before the tourists have left, before the leaves have finished falling. The Rideau Canal is still open, but only barely. The skateway won't be ready for months. The city breathes in that particular November almost way, cautious and compressed, like something bracing. Julien Côté walks the stretch of Rideau Street with his collar up and his hands in his pockets. He has been in Ottawa for 11 days. He has a room at a hostel on Nicholas Street, paid through the end of the month. He has a rental car he hasn't used since he arrived. He has in his coat pocket a small photograph so old and soft from handling that the edges have gone velvet. He doesn't look like someone who matters. That is the point. He passes a jewelry store, a chain pharmacy, a coffee shop where a woman is laughing at something on her phone. Normal things. The kind of ordinary detail his mother used to love. She said cities only revealed themselves in their mundane moments, not their monuments. His mother, Danielle Côté, grew up in Gatineau. She crossed the river into Ottawa every week for work, for shopping, for church on the rare occasions she felt like it. She knew this street. She walked this same block dozens of times. She used to say the capital felt like a city pretending to be smaller than it was, and she meant it as a compliment. She said it in her hospital bed, near the end, when the morphine made everything soft and loose, when she drifted between what was real and what she was remembering. She never came back. Julien is finishing the walk she never finished. He stops at the entrance to the Rideau Center, a shopping complex that runs a full city block, gleaming and warm on the other side of the automatic doors. Through the glass, he can see the familiar geometry of retail. The clean sightlines, the bright storefronts. The way affluence organizes itself into corridors and anchor stores and food courts that smell like cinnamon and hot grease. A woman inside the entrance is watching him through the glass. Her expression moves from assessment to decision in the same bored half-second he's seen his whole life. He's seen it in boardrooms and bodegas, and once, memorably, at the entrance of a Montreal hospital where a nurse asked him if he was there for the outpatient clinic or the emergency line, and the way she said it made clear she couldn't imagine a third option. His phone buzzes. He steps away from the door to answer. The Gatineau parcel cleared, his assistant says. Notarized, registered, fully transferred. Côté Ventures is now the legal holder. Good. Keep it quiet. Of course. Anything else before end of week? No, I need to see something first. He ends the call, slips the phone back into his pocket, takes out the photograph instead. Creased and refolded so many times, the paper has changed texture entirely, gone from stiff to something almost like cloth. It's a letter, or part of one. He's never unfolded it all the way in public. He knows the words by heart. Claim reference, CM 2003-774, Danielle M. Côté, treatment request, oncology referral and inpatient diagnostic. Status, deferred pending review. Deferred pending review. 3 words that mean nothing on paper. 3 words that, in practice, meant 4 months. 4 months of letters and phone calls and appeals and forms, requesting additional documentation. 4 months while the cancer spread from where it was manageable to where it wasn't. He was 23 years old when she died. He held her hand in a room that smelled like institutional soap, and something underneath the soap that he's never been able to name. He listened to the monitors. He watched the line go flat. He has been building Côté Ventures for 15 years since then. Infrastructure investment, northern development projects, a community health foundation that funds rural diagnostic clinics across Quebec and Ontario. He could have done something about the Marchands years ago. He had the leverage. He had the evidence, and more importantly, he had the money, which is a form of evidence that courts understand better than most. He didn't. His mother didn't raise him to burn things down. She raised him to build them, to give people a chance, to wait and watch and see who people actually are when they think no one is watching. So he dressed like someone with nothing, and he came to Ottawa and he started watching. The woman in the fur-trimmed coat is still visible through the glass. She's speaking to a young man in a store uniform, saying something quick and pointed, and the young man is nodding with the particular posture of someone who has learned to absorb displeasure without reacting to it. Julien recognizes that posture. He wore it himself for years. The automatic doors open from the inside. The woman emerges first, shopping bags in both hands, a man a step behind her carrying more bags. Everything about them speaks of the kind of wealth that has never had to prove itself. Sylviane Marchand, 54 years old, second-generation old money. Her father, Henri Marchand, ran Marchand Group's insurance and claims division for over 2 decades. He retired 7 years ago into a waterfront property in Gatineau and a board position at a hospital he'd never once visited as a patient. Julien knows all of this. He's known it for years. Sylviane's gaze lands on him. The assessment happens immediately, automatic as breathing. Excuse me, not a question. Loud enough to establish a witness. Are you waiting for something specific or just? She waves her hand in a gesture that encompasses him entirely. Lingering? Julien says nothing. She steps closer. Her composure is a weapon she's been sharpening her whole life. There are services available. If that's the situation, I volunteer with one of the organizations myself. She says this the way people say it when they want credit without giving information. On Baseline Road. I know where the services are, Julien says. Quiet, even. Something shifts in Sylviane's expression, a flicker of surprise, quickly recalibrated into irritation. Then, your father, Julien says, Henri Marchand. He ran claims at Marchand Group, didn't he? The silence that follows is total. Sylviane's husband, a man named Bertrand, expression permanently caught somewhere between boredom and discomfort, takes a small step backward. Sylviane, he says, low, careful, we should go. What did you just say? Sylviane's voice has changed. The performative patience is gone. How do you know my father's name? Julien doesn't answer. He looks at her the same way he's been looking at her since she walked out. Patient, unhurried, the way someone looks when they've already decided not to run. Sylviane turns to Bertrand, call security. Bertrand pulls out his phone. He dials, but he's looking at Julien while he does it. Something in his expression catching on the stillness, the composure, the absence of the fear Sylviane expects to create. Something doesn't compute, and Bertrand has learned, in 17 years of marriage, that when something doesn't compute around Sylviane, it's usually worth paying attention to. Across the entrance, a young woman named Priya, 26 years old, nursing student waiting for her bus, watches the exchange. She opens her camera. She starts recording. She gets 49 seconds. The confrontation, the stillness, the strange exchange about Henri Marchand. She doesn't know yet that those 49 seconds will follow Sylviane Marchand for the rest of her life. The security personnel arrive within 4 minutes. By then, a small crowd has accumulated, people pretending not to watch, which is the most common form of watching. Sylviane tells them the man approached her first, that he was aggressive, that he seemed to know personal information about her family, and that felt threatening. She's good at this. She has been giving statements her whole life, confident, polished, articulate, the kind of woman who sounds credible without trying, because no one has ever seriously doubted her. The security personnel look at Julien. Worn jacket, plain boots, second-hand everything. Sir, one of them says, we're going to have to ask you to move on. Julien complies. He moves. He doesn't raise his voice. As they walk him toward the edge of the property, he says something under his breath. Just to himself, not to them. And it's not until later that one of the guards tries to remember exactly what he said, and can't quite retrieve it. In his mind, he is 23 years old again. He is sitting in a waiting room at a Gatineau clinic, reading the letter for the first time. The paper still new and stiff, the bureaucratic language cold as metal. Deferred pending review. And underneath that, in a different section of the same letter, reviewing officer, H. Marchand, VP, claims assessment. His mother had paid into the provincial supplementary plan for 11 years. She had excellent coverage, or she thought she did. She had filed the claim the moment her GP referred her to oncology. She had done everything right. And someone named H. Marchand had looked at the file, and looked at the deductible and the projected cost and the quarterly targets, and deferred it. Not denied. Deferred, which meant nothing, officially. Which meant everything, practically. 4 months later, stage 2 had become stage 4. Treatment that might have worked 3 months earlier was palliative by the time it started. His mother sat in a chair that smelled like antiseptic and held his hand and told him not to worry. She died on November 14, 2004. Julien makes a phone call on his way back to the hostel. "Rene," he says when she answers, "I need you in Ottawa. Bring the file." "Which one?" "The Marchand Group file, the full one, not the summary." A pause. "I'll be there in the morning." He hangs up, looks at the canal through the bare trees, still and gray, reflecting nothing. His mother loved this city. He's going to make sure it remembers her name. The story that Priya posts at 7:14 that evening gets shared 40 times before midnight, 80 times by morning. It's not viral, not exactly, but it's persistent. The particular kind of spread that happens when content lands in a community that recognizes what it's seeing. An investigative journalist named Theo to everyone, 38 years old, 12 years at a regional outlet, now freelance, watches it on his laptop. He watches it 4 times. The part that catches him is the same part that caught Priya. The moment where the man says, "Your father, Henri Marchand. He ran claims at Marchand Group." The stillness of it, the certainty. Like someone who's been holding that sentence for a long time and finally put it down. Theo has covered the insurance industry. He covered the tail end of a class action case against a large group benefits provider back in 2012, a case that got quietly settled before any discovery documents became public. He covered the closures. He covered the rebranding. He knows the landscape. He searches Marchand Group and claims in 2003 and 2004, and what he finds is a trail of municipal filings, dissolved corporate entities, and a 12-year-old archived story about complaints from policyholders in the Outaouais region. The story ran 3 columns, got no follow-up, and was filed by a journalist who left the outlet 2 months later under circumstances that were described, at the time, as personal. Theo pulls out a notebook and a pen. He reaches out to the mall. No comment, pending an internal review. He reaches out to Sylviane Marchand's publicist. She has one, which tells you something, and gets a carefully worded statement about harassment and the importance of personal safety. He finds the former employee 3 days later. A woman in her 60s named Annette, who worked in Marchand Group's claims processing department from 2000 to 2007. She's in Rockland now, east of Ottawa, working at a garden center. "The quotas," she says. They're sitting at a picnic table behind the greenhouse, surrounded by the smell of turned earth and fertilizer. She's looking at her hands. "We had monthly quotas, denials, deferrals, requests for secondary documentation. They didn't call them quotas. They called them performance benchmarks." "For claims processing?" She looks up. "You know what a deferral buys you? Time. 60 days before the next review. And in 60 days, a lot of things can change for a policyholder. They find other coverage, they move provinces, they can't afford to keep following up. She pauses, or they get worse, and then the cost equation changes." Theo writes for a long time without speaking. "There was a team," Annette says. "I don't know what they called it officially. We called it the triage desk. They reviewed high-cost claims first, oncology referrals, chronic disease management, long-term diagnostics." She folds her hands on the table. "I knew what was happening. I didn't stop it. I've thought about that for a long time." Theo files a Freedom of Information request with the provincial insurance regulator. It takes 2 weeks. What comes back is partial. Some records redacted, some entirely withheld. But enough to see the shape of what Annette described. Enough to see in the statistical outlines of a complaint registry that no one was supposed to read too carefully. A pattern. He finds 3 other former policyholders willing to talk. A retired teacher from Aylmer whose husband's cardiac referral was deferred twice before the 3rd heart attack. A young man from Hull whose mother's lupus medication was denied for 6 months pending a review that never concluded. A woman in her late 40s who says she stopped fighting when she ran out of money to pay someone to fight with her. Theo has his story. He submits the draft on a Thursday afternoon. Friday morning, his editor calls. We have a problem. What kind? Marchand Family Trust. Their lawyers sent a letter to our legal team last night. They're alleging defamation. They're threatening injunction. Theo sits down. The story is documented. Every claim is verifiable. I know. We have a former employee on record. We have statistical evidence from the regulator. I know, Theo. So what's the issue? A long pause. The issue is that our legal budget is not their legal budget, and they know that. Another pause. I'm sorry, I need to sit on it. The story goes into a folder. The folder goes on a server. The server sits in a building. Theo leaves that afternoon, walking through the lobby with his coat half on and his notebook in his hand, feeling the particular specific nausea of a story killed before it could breathe. He keeps digging, unpublished, unpaid, in the hours before and after his regular freelance contracts, because there is something he can't let go. He pulls the old complaint files from the FYP response, reads through the names, policyholder after policyholder, claim after claim, deferral after deferral. He's looking for something he can't quite name yet. And then he finds it. CM 20371 Côté Danielle M. Gatineau, QC, Oncology Referral and Inpatient Diagnostic, Deferred H. Marchand, Reviewing Officer. He cross-references the Provincial Death Registry. Côté Danielle Marguerite, deceased November 14, 2004, metastatic breast cancer. He searches the son's name. What comes back rearranges every assumption he's been making. Theo calls Julien Côté's office at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning. He doesn't get brushed off this time. Put him through, a voice says, and then 40 seconds later, Mr. Okafor. Mr. Côté. Silence. Then I was wondering how long it would take. They meet at a cafe near Confederation Park, the kind of place with no good reason to exist except that it does, and has for 30 years, and the coffee is bad but the tables are private. Julien is already there when Theo arrives. Same jacket, same posture. Nothing about him announcing itself. Theo sets a recorder on the table. Julien looks at it, then at Theo and nods. The deferral, Theo says. You've known since you were 23. Since 2 weeks after she died, I found the letter in her things. And you've been building Côté Ventures since then? Yes. With what goal? Julien is quiet for a moment. Originally, I'll be honest with you. Originally, the goal was to have enough leverage that when I was ready, I could take everything Henri Marchand built and turn it into dust. He wraps both hands around his coffee. I spent the first 5 years just surviving. 3 jobs at once, some nights. Trying to build something out of nothing, which is the most exhausting sentence in the language. He pauses. By the time I had the leverage, maybe 10 years in, I'd had enough time to think clearly. And? My mother didn't raise me to destroy. He says it simply, not as a performance. She raised me to build things that lasted, to give people the chance to show who they were before deciding what they deserved. Theo writes quickly, so you came to Ottawa to give the Marchands that chance. I came to see if anything had changed. Julien looks out the window. Sylviane answered that question. What now? Now I tell the truth. All of it. Including the parts where I came here with an agenda, dressed down deliberately, hoping she'd give me a reason to believe I was wrong about who she was. His voice doesn't change, but something in it deepens. She wasn't wrong about who she is, and neither was her father. Theo clicks his pen. I have a story, my editor killed it. Marchand lawyers. Julien nods, I know. You know. I know a lot of things, including that there are 7 other families in the Outaouais region with documented deferred claims from the same 3-year period, including that one of those families has a surviving member who is a practicing attorney who has been waiting for someone with enough resources to make the case worth opening. Theo stares at him. Tell the truth, Julien says. All of it, including this part that I came here with a plan. Let people read it and decide for themselves what kind of man I am. He stands, leaves enough on the table for both coffees and a generous tip. At the door, he pauses. You'll hear from a lawyer named Isabeau Chartrand by end of week. She's the one I mentioned. She's been waiting a long time. The parking garage on Sussex is cold and smells like oil and standing water. Bertrand Marchand sits in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere. Theo stands at the passenger window. I've been trying to get out of this marriage for 2 years, Bertrand says. Not dramatically, just the way you say a thing you've said many times in your own head. I thought I knew who the Marchands were when I married into them. Maybe I did. Maybe that's the problem. He passes a folder through the window. Inside, printed emails dated across the 3 weeks following the Rideau Center incident. Communications between Sylviane, Henri, and the family's legal representatives. Handle the situation. The Okafor freelancer is a problem. The witnesses need to be managed. And then a line that Theo reads twice. Henri to family counsel. This cannot become a Côté situation. Understand, we cannot have that name anywhere near this. They know, Bertrand says. Henri knew the moment he heard the name. He's known for 20 years what that deferral did. He just never thought anyone would be able to connect it back to him in a way that mattered. Why are you doing this? Bertrand is quiet for a long moment. Because I watched Sylviane walk past that man in the entrance, and I watched him not react, and I thought, that man knows exactly what he's doing. He's completely certain of who he is. He opens his car door, steps out into the cold. I haven't been certain of anything in a very long time. He hands Theo a second document, a corporate registry printout. There's a property, Bertrand says. Hotel and Conference Center, Gatineau side. Henri has been trying to finalize the sale for 8 months. He just found out who the buyer is. He taps the document. Same buyer as the Sussex Street office tower that went to a holding company in September. Same buyer as the commercial parcel on St. Joseph Boulevard that transferred last month. He looks at Theo. It's all the same buyer. It's been the same buyer this whole time. Theo looks at the name on the filing. Côté Ventures Holdings. Ottawa Gatineau Superior Court. Civil proceedings. 9:20 a.m. on a gray November Monday, the kind of morning that feels like it was designed to make certain truths undeniable. Julien sits at the plaintiff's table. He is wearing a suit that is not expensive the way Sylviane would mean expensive. Not the kind of expense that announces itself. The kind that simply fits perfectly and lasts for decades. He's had it for 12 years. It still looks like the first week he owned it. Sylviane is across the aisle. Her attorney beside her, Henri behind her, silver hair, controlled jaw, the posture of a man who has never once in his life sat in this room and expected to lose anything. Behind the plaintiff's table, Annette from the garden center, the retired teacher from Aylmer, the young man from Hull, 2 of the 7 families from the Outaways file, Theo Okafor in the press gallery with his notebook open and his recorder running. And in the back row, barely visible, Isabeau Chartrand, 51 years old, 23 years practicing law, the most patient woman in the province of Quebec, watching the room the way you watch a thing you've been waiting to see for most of your adult life. Julien's legal team presents methodically. The Rideau Center footage, the witness statements, the corporate filings showing the pattern of Marchand Group claims practices, Annette's account rendered into a sworn affidavit and then read aloud in her own voice. The statistical analysis from the regulatory records, the 7 files from the outer region, each one a name, a date, a deferral, a consequence. And then, last, a document that has been in Julien's coat pocket for 22 years. Claim reference, CM 2003-7714, policyholder Danielle M. Côté, status, deferred pending review, reviewing officer, H. Marchand VP, claims assessment. Sylviane turns to look at her father when the claim number is read into the record. He doesn't meet her eyes. Daddy, her voice is very quiet. What is this? Henri Marchand says nothing. His attorney touches his arm. He doesn't move. Was this? Sylviane's voice breaks apart and reassembles itself. When you told me to make this go away, when you said to handle it, you knew who he was. Henri is looking at the table. You signed this. She's reading the document that's been projected on the screen. You signed this letter. Sylviane. Did you know what would happen? Did you know that she... The claim was processed in accordance with... She died, Daddy. The word lands like something physical. Everyone in the room becomes very still. His mother died. And you knew, and you told me to make it go away because of the money. Across the aisle, Julien looks at Sylviane for the first time since the proceedings started. He looks at her the way he looked at her at the Rideau Center. Patient, unhurried, except that something in it is different now. Something closer to grief, something that is neither forgiveness nor condemnation but simply witness. He sees her. He is letting her be seen. Her breakdown is not the performance she would have chosen. It is not anything she would have chosen. It is the sound of a version of herself that she thought was solid turning out to be built on something she didn't know was hollow. The judge rules. Compensatory damages awarded. Marchand Group's successor entities ordered to establish an independent review of deferred claims from the 2000 to 2010 period. Henri Marchand referred to the provincial financial regulator for investigation of the systematic deferral practices. The Rideau Center Security Company ordered to revise its conduct protocols and undergo civil rights training. Sylviane doesn't hear the ruling. She is still looking at her father. Henri Marchand does not look back at her. He is staring at a point on the table in front of him, and for the first time in a very long time, he is in a room he cannot buy his way out of. Julien walks out of the courthouse into the November gray. The canal is visible at the end of the block, still and cold, ice beginning at the edges. Theo catches him on the steps. What now? Julien looks back at the courthouse doors. Sylviane is emerging alone, no father behind her, no husband. Bertrand had filed for separation the week before, quietly, without drama. The Gatineau property, Julien says. The hotel, we're converting it. Into what? Diagnate clinic. Extended hours, no referral waitlist, sliding scale fees. Rural intake network connecting 6 communities on the Quebec side. He watches Sylviane reach the bottom of the courthouse steps. She looks, for the first time since he's seen her, like someone who doesn't know where they're going next. We break ground in February. What are you naming it? Julien turns up his collar against the wind. The canal is pale and flat in the distance, the same canal his mother walked beside on Sunday mornings, on a church trip when she was 18 years old, telling herself she'd come back someday. The Julien Côté Community Health Center, he says. She waited long enough. He walks toward the water. What happened at a shopping mall entrance on a gray October afternoon in Ottawa was not, in the end, about a shopping mall, or an October afternoon, or even Sylviane Marchand's particular brand of practiced contempt. It was about what happens when you look at someone and decide, in under 2 seconds, that you know everything about them. Sylviane Marchand looked at Julien Côté and saw a jacket and a pair of worn boots, and that was the whole of her seeing. She never saw the grief inside the jacket. She never saw the 15 years of disciplined building, the foundation, the 7 transferred properties, the attorney waiting patiently in the back row of a courtroom. She never saw his mother's name, which is the name that was going to be on a building before all of this was finished. And that is the cost of deciding you know someone before you've seen them. It is not a small cost. Henri Marchand signed a letter in 2003 that he thought no one would ever connect back to him in any way that mattered. He was wrong about what mattered. He has been living inside that mistake for 20 years, and now he is going to live inside the consequences. Sylviane is in therapy. She hasn't spoken to her father since the hearing. People who know her say she's thinking about leaving Ottawa, and that when she goes, it won't be to anywhere her family's name carries weight. Whether that makes her someone who changed or just someone who left is a question only time can answer. Bertrand is in Montreal now. He writes occasional emails to no one in particular and seems, by all accounts, lighter than he has ever been. And Julien Côté is standing in front of a property in Gatineau on the 1st of February, in the same jacket and the same boots and the same quiet patience, watching the construction crew begin what will take 6 months to finish and the rest of a life to mean what he intends it to mean. He has his mother's photograph in his coat pocket. Not the letter this time, just the photograph, her face in the Gatineau sunlight, 30-something years ago, before everything. He doesn't take it out. He doesn't need to. He knows exactly who she was and what she asked of him, and what it cost to give her what she asked. Build something, don't just tear down. The world has enough people who tear things down. He watches the foundation go in, the first concrete of the morning, gray and cold and permanent, and above the site where the signage will go, there is already a bracket, 2 thin metal arms reaching out from the building's face, ready to hold a name. She was here, she belongs here, she always did. I keep thinking about that moment outside the Rideau Center. Not the confrontation itself, the 2 seconds before it. The moment Sylviane looked at Julien and decided she already knew everything she needed to know. 2 seconds. That's all it took, a jacket, a pair of boots, a man standing quietly near an entrance. And from that, an entire verdict, who he was, what he deserved, whether he had any business breathing the same air as her. What I've come to believe after sitting with this story for a long time is that the way we treat people we think can't hurt us is the truest thing about us. Not our charitable donations, not our volunteer work on Baseline Road that we mention in passing to sound like decent people. The truest thing is what we do when we're certain there are no consequences, when we're sure the power is entirely ours. Sylviane was sure. And Julien, he knew she would be. That's why he dressed the way he did. That's why he came to Ottawa in a worn jacket instead of arriving the way someone with his resources could have arrived. He wasn't testing her to be cruel. He was giving her a genuine chance to be different from what he feared she was. He was hoping, after 20 years, that something had changed in the Marchand family. That what her father did to his mother was a failure of one man in one moment, not a way of seeing the world passed down like inheritance. She answered that question within 2 seconds of looking at him. What strikes me most about Julien isn't the outcome, the courtroom, the building, the clinic going up in Gatineau with his mother's name on it. What strikes me is the 15 years before any of that. 3 jobs at once. Building something from nothing, which really is the most exhausting thing a person can do, because you're not just building a company, you're building the version of yourself that can survive what happened to you without becoming it. You're deciding every single day that grief doesn't get to be the last word about who you are. That takes a particular kind of character. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind, the kind that shows up in how you treat a waitress, in whether you leave a decent tip when no one's watching, in whether you're the same person when you have nothing as when you have everything. Julien was, that's the whole story, really. And Henri Marchand, he signed that letter in 2003 thinking it was just paperwork. A quarterly target. A number on a spreadsheet that needed to move in the right direction. He didn't think about Julien Côté in the waiting room. He didn't think about her son holding her hand while the monitors went flat. He didn't think about the way choices compound. The way a deferral becomes 4 months, becomes stage 4, becomes a November morning in 2004 that a 23-year-old carries in his coat pocket for the rest of his life. But choices do compound. They always do. That's not fate, and it's not punishment from anywhere outside ourselves. It's just the plain, unglamorous mechanics of cause and effect. What you do accumulates. What you ignore accumulates. What you refuse to see about other people accumulates quietly, until one day it's standing at the bottom of a jet staircase in a suit, and the thing you thought you'd buried 20 years ago is looking straight at you. The clinic opens in February. The name goes on the building. Julien Côté waited long enough.